The fork was still in the air when my mother said that. The table froze, and time stopped as if the world had forgotten to turn for a second. My father lowered his eyes. My sister stopped chewing, and I just stared. My stomach churned, but not from hunger. That sentence cut me more than any kitchen knife. "You don't belong in this family anymore," she repeated, without even looking up from her plate. She continued eating as if she'd just commented on the weather. I wondered if I'd heard correctly, if it was a cruel joke, but there was no laughter, just the sound of rice being chewed, as if nothing had happened. My heart raced and my body froze, as if I'd been hit by an invisible punch. Her words echoed in my ears, repeating over and over. Everything inside me screamed, but outwardly, I remained motionless. It was as if I'd disappeared, a shadow in the corner of the room, and yet, no one said anything. My father, always oblivious, pretended the fork was very interesting. My sister clutched the napkin in her hands but said nothing, and I swallowed hard, feeling the tears burn behind my eyes. "Don't cry," I told myself. Not here, not now. But it was impossible to hold back. I wanted to scream, break everything, demand explanations. But I was raised not to make a fuss, to accept it in silence. And in that moment, I realized that silence was all I had. The pain grew, but no one cared. That sentence wasn't a mistake. It was a sentence. And that's when I understood. Something was about to change, or rather it already had. I was just the last to realize it. Something big was behind this, and as much as it hurt, I needed to understand why, even if it destroyed me inside. Before continuing, share this story to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. I'll be thrilled to read each comment. The next second, I got up from the table, but my legs felt like stone. The air grew denser, as if it were being sucked out of the room. I leaned hard against the chair, trying not to collapse. My mother didn't even blink. She continued cutting the meat, as if my presence there were an invisible nuisance. Flashbacks began to come in waves. I remembered the past few months, the strange looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when I arrived. I remembered the hugs that disappeared, the cold responses, and the smiles that turned into disgusted grimaces. I just didn't want to believe it was all real. But now, I couldn't deny it anymore. I took a deep breath and walked to the door. The house felt colder, more hostile than ever. Each step echoed like a silent farewell, and while my mother still chewed quietly, I crossed the room as if I were a stranger there, a stranger expelled without warning. I reached the front door and hesitated. I turned around one last time, trying to figure out if this was truly the end, but no one turned around. No one tried to stop me. It was as if I'd never truly belonged there, and maybe they'd always thought so. I closed the door carefully. The click was soft, but to me it sounded like thunder, the kind of sound that announces a storm, or the beginning of a new life. And it was there, in the silence of the hallway, that chapter 1 of my true story began. I grew up believing that a mother's love was sacred, unconditional, and invincible. But over time, I realized that my mother's affection came with labels: behavior, appearance, obedience. If I fit the mold she designed, I received a smile. If not, silence followed me for days. And this gradually eroded my self-esteem. She was the kind of woman who lived for appearances: an immaculate house, well-groomed children, dinners with neighbors she hated but insisted on impressing. I was the one who didn't fit in. I had my own ideas, didn't fake happiness, didn't follow the script. And that, to her, was unforgivable. I began to feel like being me was a problem. My father, though physically present, was emotionally absent. He never intervened, never took sides. He was a ghost at her side. And my younger sister learned early on that to please was to survive. She became the perfect daughter, or at least the one who knew how to pretend best. I became isolated within my own home. The arguments started small, like barbs hidden in everyday phrases. "Why do you always mess up?" she'd say when something got out of hand. I blamed myself. I tried to improve, change, adapt, but it was never enough. Every attempt to please became a weapon used against me later. Even in the good times, and there were few, there was tension. Her smile always came with a warning. Enjoy it, but don't get used to it. Over time, I developed a fear of happiness because I knew it had an expiration date. It was a suffocating cycle: conditional love, approval based on performance, a contract I didn't sign but was obligated to follow. And when I started to discover who I really was, everything got worse. My clothes changed. My friends changed. I started speaking my mind. And that's when she decided I was a threat to the family's image. From that point on, I became a burden, a mistake she wanted to hide, as if I were something to be fixed or discarded. That comment at lunch didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of a Cold War that had lasted months. Everything began to fall apart when I told her I wasn't going to follow her plans for my life. I didn't want to study medicine. I didn't want to marry someone from a good family. I just wanted to be me. And that, to her, was unforgivable. A crime of disobedience. It started with her pretending not to hear. Then came the jokes disguised as advice. You still have time to get back to normal. When I insisted on my decisions, she began to exclude me from conversations. Everything I said was dismissed. It was as if I'd lost the right to exist there. I gradually became invisible. The criticism began to come in public, especially in front of relatives. He was so smart, I don't know what happened. I listened silently, but inside I bled. Seeing my mother transform my identity into a source of shame was a pain indescribable. It wasn't just rejection. It was betrayal from the very person who was supposed to protect me. She started searching my things, intercepting messages on my phone, demanding passwords. She said it was for my own good, but it was pure control. I no longer had any space or freedom. I started spending more time away from home, sleeping at friends' houses, trying to breathe, but each return was worse. The air in the house suffocated me. Even so, I still hoped something would change, that she would notice, that my father would wake up, that my sister would say something. But the silence from all three of them was deafening. Each, in their own way, was contributing to my erasure. I was still there, but my family had already buried me alive, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. Sunday lunch was just the final blow. But the poison had already been served in small doses, dish after dish over the years. And there, at that table, in front of everyone, she had the courage to decree what she had been rehearsing for months. The exclusion was now official, and I had to decide whether to keep fighting or to turn my back for good. That night, lying on the couch at my friend Noah's house, I stared at the ceiling for hours. My mother's words still hammered at me. You don't belong in this family anymore. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a seal of exile. I no longer had a home, no grounding. The question that kept echoing was, what to do now? Noah noticed my state and offered me something I hadn't expected: space. He didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix anything. He just looked at me like someone who saw pain and knew how to respect it. That simple gesture was more like family than my mother had been able to be in years. And it was there, in the silence of that room, that I knew what I needed to do. I grabbed my phone and started writing a letter. Not a reply to my mother, but a manifesto to myself. There, I said everything I'd always been afraid to say, that I refused to be erased, that I would no longer beg for crumbs of love, that for the first time, I would be loyal to myself, not to anyone else's standards. The decision hurt. I felt alone, small, broken. But also, for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of freedom. I could build something new, outside the script she'd written, outside the walls of that house. I could truly exist. And that idea, though painful, was powerful. The next day, I went back to get my things. My father was in the garden, pretending to tend to the plants. My mother didn't show up. My sister looked at me from afar but said nothing. I went in, gathered what was mine, and left without saying a word. That house wasn't mine anymore, and maybe it never had been. Noah helped me carry everything to the car, and before he got in, he said, "You deserve so much more than what they tried to give you." That disarmed me. For the first time in a long time, I cried. But it was a pure cry. The cry of someone leaving something behind, not of someone who lost everything. It was the beginning of a new road. 2 days later, the scandal began. My mother posted a photo of the family on Instagram, with a cutting caption, "A real family sticks together." The caption had a venomous tone, but the comments were even worse. "Where's the oldest?" they asked. "You guys are better off this way," some replied. And she liked every bit of it. Messages started popping up on my phone, from aunts, cousins, people who hadn't even spoken to me. Everyone now had something to say. Some said they were on my side, but that they couldn't interfere. Others accused me of being ungrateful, of bringing shame to my family. It was as if my life had become a public spectacle. Even my sister posted a story with the caption, free from bad energy. That destroyed me more than my mother's post, because I still had hope that she would understand, that she would see me. But now it was official. They were building a new narrative, where I was the villain, the rebel, the sick one. The leaked conversations, the screenshots that circulated, everything pointed to a plan they had already been hatching, painting me as unstable, dangerous, a threat, all of this to justify my departure. The pain this caused was indescribable. I didn't just lose my family. I was rewritten as a mistake they wanted to erase, but the pain became fuel. Instead of hiding, I started speaking out. I recorded videos, told my story, shared my side. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about survival. And surprisingly, other people began to identify. I wasn't alone. There were many like me, living similar silences. While they crafted a beautiful version of the lie, I crafted the raw truth, and that truth, though painful, began to resonate. Masks were falling, and sooner or later, the world would see who was wounded in the suit and who was causing the wounds. The battle was far from over, but I was no longer on my knees. Weeks passed, and anger gave way to clarity. I didn't want revenge. I wanted dignity. One day, I decided to call my mother, not because I expected an apology, but because I needed closure with the truth spoken out loud. The phone rang several times before being answered. When she spoke, her voice was cold. "Why are you calling?" she said, as if answering an unknown number. I took a deep breath. "Because I'm still your son, even if you've forgotten that." The silence on the other end was more painful than any words, and after a few seconds she simply replied, "You chose to leave, so stay out," and hung up. My hands trembled, but the pain turned to courage. I called my father. He answered quickly, as if he'd been expecting my call. I told him everything, the humiliations, the omissions, the wounds. He listened quietly. In the end, he simply said, I didn't know how to act. He was honest. Weak, but honest. And I realized I couldn't expect strength from someone who had always chosen to hide. The last attempt was with my sister. I sent her an audio message. I told her how I felt, how much it hurt to see her repeat our mother's speech. I told her I still loved her, despite everything. But now, I needed to love myself first. She listened, but didn't respond. Silence, once again. A pattern that no longer hurt me as it once did. That's when I understood. The confrontation I needed wasn't with them. It was with myself, with the fear of being alone, with the guilt I'd carried for years for not being what they expected. There, in that void, I freed myself, because I finally saw that it wasn't me who was broken. It was the entire structure that was rotten, and in that moment, instead of collapsing, I stood up, stronger than ever. I decided that if they had ostracized me for being honest, then I had won, because I was free. And freedom, even with pain, is better than any prison disguised as home. After the confrontation, something in me changed. It was as if a part of me had died, and another had been born at the same time. I started taking care of myself. I changed my look, my schedule, and went back to studying what I loved. Art. Something my mother always said was, something for people who don't want anything from life. Now, it was all I wanted. I enrolled in a free City Hall course and started working with video editing. Little by little, I transformed my pain into creativity. My YouTube channel, which was small, began to grow. People saw themselves in my stories. They wrote to me. They cried with me. I named their pain, and it healed me too. It was a cycle of reconstruction. One day, one of the videos went viral. Thousands of comments, hundreds of shares. People shared their stories, their traumas, their breakups. I cried reading each one. For the first time, what had hurt me became a bridge, a connection. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us. And that made me understand. My story mattered. With the exposure also came discomfort from my family. Indirect messages began to appear. Stop playing the victim. You just want to be seen. But I didn't respond, because now I had something they'd never given me, a voice. And I wasn't going to keep quiet for fear of disturbing them. Those who live by lies fear those who speak the truth. I began giving interviews, participating in discussion groups, and events about mental health, family exclusion, and identity. Each conversation was healing. Each encounter was a brick in the new house I was building, a symbolic home, where I finally fit in, where I didn't have to conform to be accepted, where just being was enough. And so, amid the shards of what they destroyed, something new was born. A life that didn't follow the imposed script, but one I wrote with my own hands. And for the first time, I was the protagonist. Not of a drama, but of a liberation. Months passed. The pain gave way to a strange peace. It still hurt, of course, especially on special occasions, like my birthday. But the absence began to transform into space. And in that space, I discovered I could plant new things, real bonds, built without pressure, without fear, without demands. I began to surround myself with people who saw me, not for my performance, but for my essence. Noah was the first. Then came other friends, co-workers, people I met through the videos. Little by little, I formed my own family. Chosen, connected by affection, not blood. And that's worth more than any last name. One day, I received a text from my sister. Short. No emojis, no excuse. Can we talk? My heart raced. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but another, more mature part knew I needed to listen. Calmly, without expectations, I arranged to meet her at a cafe downtown. She arrived nervous, her eyes downcast. She cried as soon as she saw me. She said she missed me every day, that she repeated our mother's words out of fear, out of pressure, that she felt weak, like a coward. I listened in silence. Each word she spoke was both a knife and a bandage. It hurt, but it also healed. Because there, for the first time, someone in my family asked me for forgiveness. We didn't hug, not that day, but the ice began to melt. She promised she wouldn't keep quiet anymore. This was the beginning of therapy. I wanted to know myself truly, without filters. For the first time, I felt I could trust her. Not because I wanted a perfect sister, but because she was willing to be human. I left that cafe with my heart racing. Something had begun. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was a step. And one step toward affection is always better than 1,000 miles of prideful distance. Perhaps some bridges could still be rebuilt, as long as they were built with truth. Walking through the city that day made me reflect on everything I've experienced, where I came from, where I've ended up, how much pain I've kept to myself for years, and how I survived even when I thought I had no strength left. I was living proof that it's possible to rise again even when the root of your pain comes from those who should love you. I looked around and saw so many people walking hurriedly, headphones on, staring at the ground. And I wondered how many there were living stories similar to mine, how many had been expelled without warning, how many had to be reborn amid abandonment, how many were suffering in silence, feigning normalcy. I thought about the child I once was, who drew pictures and left them on my mother's bedroom door, waiting for a compliment, who changed her tone of voice so as not to seem too feminine, who apologized for even existing. That child still lives inside me, but today, I protect her. Today, I care for her. Today, she is no longer alone. I also thought about my mother, about what made her become who she is, not as an excuse, but as an attempt to understand. Perhaps she too was shaped by a family that erased what was different. Maybe she simply repeated what she learned. But understanding isn't the same as accepting, and forgiving isn't forgetting. Today I know, it's not my job to fix the traumas she refused to face. It's not my job to carry guilt that doesn't belong to me. I am who I am, and that's enough. Her pain doesn't justify the pain she caused me, and moving forward isn't denying the past. It's choosing to let it no longer hold me back. Every step I take now is my own, with scars, yes, but also with conscious choices. And among all the truths I've learned, the most valuable is this: anyone who doesn't accept you as you are doesn't truly love you. They only love the molded version of you they created, and living inside a lie, never again. I began to see my pain as a map. Each scar showed a place where I fell, but also where I rose, and that turned into strength, a kind of maturity that only comes when you're forced to face abandonment. Because when you survive heartbreak, you learn to love yourself fiercely. At work, I got a promotion. My boss said he'd never seen anyone so sensitive to transforming feelings into images. That was it. I no longer needed to feign strength. My vulnerability was my superpower. I started making videos about healing processes, identity, and self-awareness. People from all over the world wrote to me. With the money from my videos and freelance work, I rented my first apartment. Small, modest, but with my own personality. Every detail was my choice. The first night there, lying on the mattress on the floor, bare, was one of the happiest of my life. For the first time, I slept peacefully, without fear, without tension. It was my space. Little by little, I hung paintings I'd made myself. I cooked my own food. I listened to music that made me feel good. I rewatched movies my mother said were rubbish, and I cried with each one. That house wasn't just a roof, it was a symbol. I had rebuilt myself, from scratch, without the help of those who claimed to love me. I had won. In therapy, I began to forgive, not for them, but for myself. Carrying hurt is like holding broken glass in your chest. With every step, it bleeds, and I wanted to bleed less. Not to forget, but to let go. What they did is part of me, but it doesn't define me. What defines me now is what I choose to do with this pain, and I chose to transform. I chose to follow. I chose to be. Today, I look in the mirror and see someone who is no longer afraid of you, who no longer lowers their head, who understands that belonging to a family is not an obligation. It's a privilege, and if they expelled you, it's because they never deserved you. Life goes on, and it can be beautiful. A few months later, I learned my mother was sick. Cancer. The news came through a distant aunt. I was in shock. She hadn't contacted me, not even to tell me. I stood in the living room of my apartment for hours, holding my cell phone. Part of me wanted to run to her. The other part froze. I didn't know what to do. The boy I used to be would have run. The man I am today hesitated, not out of spite, but out of protection. I knew I couldn't offer myself completely again to someone who rejected me so easily, but I also knew that if I didn't go, I would regret it. So I went. Afraid. But I went. I arrived at the hospital with a lump in my throat. She was thinner, frail. When she saw me, she didn't cry, but her eyes lit up for a second. "You came?" she whispered. I simply said, "Yes." I sat next to her. We didn't say much, but the silence was less aggressive this time. There was something different there, a new space. In the following days, I returned more often. Sometimes she spoke, other times she just slept. But my presence was constant, not out of obligation, but by choice. Not to fix the past, but to end the cycle with dignity. Each visit was a period on a poorly written sentence between us, and it brought me an unexpected peace. On one of those visits, she held my hand. "You're not who I wanted you to be, but you're better than I dreamed, and I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner." I closed my eyes. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. Some pain doesn't go away, but it can be embraced. And in that room, I decided to leave the hate there and leave feeling lighter. There was no complete reconciliation. There was no movie ending, but there was truth. And that, coming from her, was rare. It was too late to rebuild everything, but not too late to understand. I left that night knowing that, despite everything, I did what my heart needed. And for the first time, it was at peace. The morning she died, I was there. I sat beside her bed and held her cold hand. The room was quiet, but not empty. There was something in the air, a kind of mutual acceptance. I didn't expect redemption. I just wanted her to leave knowing I'd survived. That, despite everything, there was still something whole inside me. She opened her eyes one last time. She looked at me without judgment, without a mask. For the first time, I didn't see my mother as a monster. I saw a broken, confused woman, trying to deal with her own ghosts. And there, in that weary gaze, I understood something brutal. Sometimes, a father's or mother's love is sick, but it's still love. "You are strong," she whispered. Those were her last words, and it pierced me, because I'd fought so long to prove myself that I'd forgotten to realize that deep down, I was already everything she said I wasn't. Strong, brave, true. And even though she recognized it late, part of me needed to hear it. She was gone a few hours later. I left the hospital without tears, not because I was cold, but because everything I had to cry about, I had already cried about. The mourning wasn't for what was lost now, but for what never existed, for the stolen childhood, for the conditional love, for the peace that took decades to arrive. At the funeral, my sister stood by my side. She cried profusely, and when she hugged me, she whispered, "Thank you for coming." I didn't respond. I just squeezed her hand. My entire family was there, those who judged me, those who erased me. But this time, I didn't shrink. I walked among them with my head held high, not as an enemy, but as a survivor. As I left the cemetery, a cold wind blew across my face. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was as if something had been buried there with me. Not just my mother, but the version of me that tried to be accepted by people who never wanted to understand me. From that day on, everything would be different. Everything would be mine. Today, I write this story calmly, not with anger, not with pain, but with clarity. It took me years to understand that not every happy ending comes like in the movies. Sometimes the happy ending is simply having survived, having resisted, having chosen to move on, even without support, even when abandoned. Having learned to exist, even after hearing, "You don't belong." I set up my own creative space. I make videos, write, paint. I get messages from people who say, "You put into words what I could never say." This moves me. It keeps me going, because I know that transforming pain into art doesn't erase the suffering, but it prevents it from being in vain. My sister and I are still rebuilding. It's slow, full of stumbles, but it's true, and that alone is worth it. My father, after my mother's death, gradually approached me. He said he wanted to do things differently. I still don't know if I'm ready, but I'm willing to listen, because today, I know I can say no without fear. I learned that blood ties don't guarantee love, and that love, when it truly comes, doesn't require you to hide who you are. I learned that silence can be a weapon, but also a shield, and that sometimes, the greatest test of courage is simply to keep going, to keep being, even after being rejected. And if you're listening to this and have been through something similar, I want to tell you, you're not alone. Your story matters. You have value, even if no one sees it, even if they say otherwise. The truth is, no one can take away your right to fully exist. Life can begin again, at any moment, and you deserve that new beginning. Now, I can say firmly, I belong, not to the family that cast me out, but to the life I chose to live. And in this life, there is no room for those who only accept part of me. I am whole, I am true, and this is my liberation. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see all the versions of myself that survived. The boy who wanted to be accepted, the teenager who screamed in silence, the young man who was rejected, and the adult who chose to rebuild himself. They're all here, and they all deserve to be celebrated, because each, in their own way, fought for me. It wasn't easy. It's not easy, but I'll never again abandon myself to fit into someone else's world. I've learned that living truthfully hurts, but living hidden hurts much more. If someone makes you feel like you don't belong, maybe the problem isn't you. It's the place they tried to force you into. Family isn't always home. Sometimes it's a prison, and sometimes the greatest act of self-love is to leave, close the door, say enough is enough, and build your own path with your own hands. No one should need to be expelled to discover their strength, but if you were, turn it into freedom. That's what I did, and I never went back. If you saw yourself in this story, if something here touched you, it's because you also carry similar marks. And that's okay. We don't need to hide our scars. They're proof that we've been through the worst, and we're still here. And that, in itself, is a miracle, an act of resistance, a cry for existence. Now, I live my truth every day, without needing to apologize for who I am, without begging for affection, without shrinking, because true love begins within us. And when it blossoms, no one else has the power to extinguish it. You become light, and light doesn't mold itself, it simply shines. If this story touched you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell to receive more stories like this, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. I read every comment with an open heart. You are not alone, and you never will be. Our shared truth heals. Thank you for listening to the end.